This small town, where every street is intertwined with old houses and stories from past generations, always exudes a tranquil atmosphere, as if time had stopped long ago. Each morning, creaky wooden doors swing open, people stroll along familiar roads, exchanging greetings. Yet, it seems no one truly knows one another. Within those houses, secrets are carefully hidden, as if they had never existed. In this modest-sized town, where every gaze furtively follows the steps of others, everyone knows Henry, a reclusive 80-year-old man who resides in a grand mansion, completely detached from the outside world. He is an eccentric, wealthy, and solitary figure. While many in town cannot deny their respect for his fortune and reputation, they also cannot suppress whispers about his shadowy past. However, the story truly begins when Ben, an 18-year-old yearning for freedom and desperate to escape the prejudices of small-town life, enters Henry's life. Their relationship, seemingly harmless, gradually becomes the centerpiece of the town's conversations. Ben, 18 years old, is a young man yearning for freedom, constantly feeling trapped in a small town where everything is limited. Despite having just graduated, he struggles to find meaning in a life filled with expectations from his family and society. The town feels suffocatingly small, where everyone knows each other but lacks true understanding. To Ben, life is like an iron cage where he can barely breathe. Dreaming of escaping these confines, Ben turns to Henry. Henry, 80 years old, is a wealthy yet lonely man. His grand mansion is filled with darkness and secrets. Henry's past is shrouded in mystery, with stories of property disputes, shady relationships, and sins he has kept hidden throughout his life. Despite this, his outward life masks a man burdened with loneliness and inner torment. When Ben meets Henry, he finds a rare companion, someone who understands him during moments of alienation in a judgmental society. Their conversations are never public, taking place only in the quiet nights within Henry's mansion. Though unspoken, their relationship grows in its own unique way, gradually making them each other's anchor in a world full of misunderstandings. However, on one ominous night, Henry is brutally murdered in his own mansion. The police are alerted by the housekeeper when his body is discovered. Ben, one of the last people to meet Henry, suddenly disappears after the incident, making him the prime suspect in a grisly murder case. The police received an emergency call on a stormy night from one of Henry's housekeepers, who had discovered the body and hastily reported the incident. At his mansion, the blood-soaked crime scene revealed a horrifying brutality. Henry's body lay on the floor, face up, his eyes wide open, as if still in shock from the sudden attack. The deep wounds across his body suggested a violent struggle, with clear evidence that the victim had been assaulted with extreme force. There were no signs of a robbery. His possessions, from an expensive watch to other valuable items in the room, remained untouched. Yet the blood spattered across the scene told a different story. This was no murder motivated by greed. What raised suspicion for the investigators was the rage evident in the wounds, as if the killer was not only intent on taking Henry's life, but also on inflicting suffering. This level of savagery could not have come from a stranger. It bore the marks of familiarity of a long-standing relationship that had festered in the shadows. From the very first moments of the investigation, Ben, the 18-year-old boy, was identified as one of the last people to see Henry alive. The police began delving into the relationship between Ben and Henry, and soon a shadowy picture started to emerge. While the small town was no stranger to gossip, the relationship between an 80-year-old man and a young boy defied every boundary the community could accept. Rumors of secret meetings between the two and whispered conversations in the darkness of Henry's mansion spread quickly. Then came the leaked cryptic messages and photos of Ben and Henry, further fueling suspicions. Everything seemed to point to one conclusion: Ben might have been the last person with Henry, and perhaps he was the one who had taken his life. A witness even claimed to have seen Ben leaving the mansion the evening before the crime, adding to the growing doubts. The police decided to search Ben's house, hoping to find a crucial lead. However, when they arrived, Ben was gone. No one knew where he had gone or why he had suddenly disappeared. He wasn't answering his phone, and despite the police's exhaustive search, they found no trace of him contacting anyone during this time. After several days with no trace of him, Ben suddenly reappeared in town but under suspicious circumstances. He was found in a shabby room on the outskirts of town, a place no one would have expected him to go. The police brought him in for questioning, but Ben kept his head down and refused to answer any questions. When asked about his disappearance, he vaguely claimed that he needed to get away from everything, to have some space to think. But no one believed him, especially as the truth about Henry's death continued to unfold. Ben denied all accusations, repeatedly insisting that he had nothing to do with Henry's death. However, his explanations failed to convince the investigators. His sudden disappearance only heightened suspicions that he might have been trying to avoid the authorities, or worse, that he was hiding a secret no one in this town dared to imagine. The ambiguity in Ben's statements made the investigation even more complicated. Was he the killer, or was he just a pawn in a dangerous game orchestrated by Henry himself? This question remained unanswered. During the investigation, the deep secrets of Henry began to surface. Henry was not the kind, gentle old man people had assumed. His life, though unknown to most for many years, was filled with darkness. The police quickly realized that Henry's relationships were far from simple or clean. Through legal documents, they discovered that he had been involved in numerous lawsuits with people from various industries, workers, business partners, even women. These lawsuits were not just ordinary disputes. They seemed to carry signs of deceit and manipulation. Some old records revealed that Henry had used his power and wealth to control and exploit those around him. Former witnesses testified that Henry was not just a cold-hearted boss, but a man with a dark side who used his influence to oppress his subordinates. The accusations suggested he had caused harm to many people, leaving them in difficult situations while he prospered. His secretive relationships with women, power struggles with business partners, and fraudulent actions in the past left a dark trail. Many considered Henry to be a villain, and in the eyes of his enemies, his death could very well be the long-awaited revenge. One of the witnesses, who had worked for Henry but now lived elsewhere, shared terrifying stories about how he treated his employees. The individual recalled the haunting days of enduring harsh criticism from Henry. He never forgave the smallest mistake, the witness said. Every time I did something wrong, he would berate me with cruel words. If you didn't please him, you'd be thrown out without a second thought. The police began to realize that these relationships, which appeared calm on the surface, might hold the key to understanding the deeper reasons behind Henry's death. A man like him, with so many enemies and a tainted past, could he have been the target of a long-awaited act of revenge? However, the case became even more complicated as the police continued to delve into the relationship between Ben and Henry. People in the town began to raise questions about their connection, especially after some reported seeing Ben frequently visiting Henry's mansion during late hours. Their meetings were no longer just casual chats. Some started to speculate about the nature of their relationship, and gradually rumors of a romantic involvement began to emerge. In such a small town, where every action was closely observed, strange relationships quickly became the subject of gossip and prying eyes. Ben, an 18-year-old with aspirations and a desire to escape the confines of this small town, had claimed that Henry was the only person who understood him during the years he had felt isolated. Ben had grown up in a conservative family where everything was tightly controlled, from meals to daily conversations. He always felt stifled, as though he was living in a box. So when he met Henry, an older, wealthy man with a cold exterior, who understood the loneliness Ben felt as though he had found a kindred spirit. Their relationship began with brief conversations at the local grocery store, where Ben worked part-time in the afternoons. At first, it was just casual greetings, but gradually they began talking about life, art, and stories from the past. Henry, though seemingly distant, shared with Ben his deep thoughts about life, lessons he had learned over the years. Their conversations were always private, never made public. Everything happened in the shadows, in the luxurious space of Henry's mansion, where no one knew what was really going on. Those late nights, brief meetings, and whispered words no one heard only deepened the mystery of their relationship. Perhaps it was these secret encounters that led the small town to judge and oppose their bond. The townspeople were not quick to accept such a relationship, especially when they began to suspect that it might not just be friendship. Things worsened when some townsfolk, who always kept an eye on each other's movements, started telling strange stories about Ben and Henry. They not only met during the late hours but also had intimate conversations, sharing affectionate glances. While no one had witnessed these encounters directly, the rumors spread, turning their relationship into a hot topic everywhere. Some in the town started to label it as an abnormal relationship, while others, even though not directly involved, felt uneasy about something they couldn't fully understand. Ben always said that Henry was the only person who understood him during his lonely youth. That simple statement made people curious. Could it truly be just friendship between a young man and an elderly wealthy man? Or was there something deeper hidden within those late-night conversations and secret meetings? The townspeople began to question whether Ben could be the one who killed Henry, or whether their relationship had something to do with the elderly man's violent death. All these secrets seemed like they would never fully come to light, but the complex relationship between Ben and Henry might just be the key to solving the case. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the rumors surrounding the strange relationship between Ben and Henry began to spread like wildfire in the small town. Impossible to control. The residents of this tight-knit neighborhood, where every action was observed and discussed after each meal, couldn't ignore Ben's frequent appearances at Henry's mansion. Late-night meetings, the sight of Ben leaving the elderly man's house in the dark, all became the subject of suspicion. Everything seemed to grow even more mysterious as the gossip started to spread. Although no one truly knew what was happening in their conversations, these silent meetings became impossible for the town to stop talking about. Tension grew as members of the community began to question the nature of the relationship between Ben and Henry. It was no longer just innocent curiosity. For many in the town, the bond between a young man and an elderly man was strange and hard to accept. This town was accustomed to straightforward relationships, traditional couples where everything fell within long-established social boundaries. Now, the presence of Ben, a young and energetic man, alongside Henry, a wealthy yet distant and mysterious elderly man, made many feel uneasy. While their relationship was not wrong legally, for the townspeople, it was far from simple. Some started to speculate that their relationship was more than just friendship. It might be something deeper and more complicated, something that society couldn't accept. They wondered if there was something abnormal in their connection, or if it was simply two lonely people finding comfort in each other in a vast and cold world. But no matter how it was explained, what everyone couldn't ignore was the oddity of their relationship and the unexplainable nature of their late-night meetings. The scrutinizing eyes and whispered conversations created a tense atmosphere that Ben couldn't escape. As the rumors intensified, Ben felt more isolated than ever. He couldn't understand why a relationship with no malice could be judged and doubted in such a way. Yet, no matter how he tried, this town couldn't let go of its old-fashioned views and its biased perception of what they deemed unnormal. The police continued to explore the crime scene, but the evidence they collected was anything but clear. A fingerprint of Ben was found on a cup in Henry's office, resting on the desk where he had spent many years researching and writing. However, this fingerprint was not definitive evidence. Ben had often visited Henry, sometimes to chat, sometimes for brief conversations. Therefore, the fingerprint could be a remnant from past visits when everything was still normal. But in the current situation, this fingerprint became a suspicious piece of the puzzle that could not be ignored. The deeper the investigation went, the more the police found themselves confused when a part of Henry's journal went missing. This journal, believed to be where Henry documented his thoughts, ideas, and significant events in his life, was one of the crucial pieces of the investigation. However, a few pages of the journal had mysteriously vanished, leaving a gap that the investigators could not overlook. What remained in the journal indicated that Henry had complex relationships with many people, which could explain why he had a number of unseen enemies. Could the missing pages contain secrets Henry had tried to conceal? Or were they simply records of mundane interactions unrelated to the crime? Moreover, the police discovered a series of calls and messages between Ben and an unknown person in the days leading up to the murder. These messages were vague and unclear, and the recipient's identity could not be determined. The stranger was someone Ben had never mentioned before. This raised questions about the connection between Ben and this person, and whether there could be a relationship between them and Henry's death. Despite the police's efforts to trace the phone number, all leads hit dead ends. Everything seemed to be carefully hidden, and Ben remained the only missing piece that the police could not yet fit into the crime puzzle. These incomplete pieces made the case even more complicated. Each piece of evidence, each small detail could be a crucial key, but they couldn't be explained clearly. This left investigators feeling as if they were walking through a labyrinth with no exit, with all suspicions remaining as vague, distant glimmers they could not touch. The police continued to dig into Henry's past, and the new evidence only made the portrait of his life more complicated and darker. Some individuals, former victims of Henry's scams, were found in his records. There were years of property disputes with business partners, foul relationships with workers, and even lawsuits over financial rights. Henry, despite being a wealthy and powerful man, had no shortage of enemies. However, none of these individuals had a clear motive to kill him. They might have despised him, but none had a strong enough reason to murder him brutally. The case remained at a deadlock. Everything took a sudden turn when a new witness came forward. Mark, a former employee who had worked for Henry for many years, walked into the police station with a shocking testimony. He claimed to have witnessed Henry's deceitful and cruel treatment of his employees, including himself. Mark explained that Henry was not just greedy and selfish, but also destructive to the lives of those around him to achieve his personal goals. Mark revealed that he had once been a victim in a business deal with Henry, losing all his assets and falling into poverty. However, what Mark couldn't forgive was how Henry used his power to push his family to the brink of collapse. Mark's testimony forced the police to seriously consider the possibility that Henry had created many enemies throughout his life. Yet, as the police analyzed Mark's statement more closely, they discovered odd inconsistencies. Some of his descriptions of the crime scene, like the specific position of Henry's body or objects being disturbed in the room, matched details that had never been publicly released. The contradictions in his testimony made the police dig deeper, as some of the details Mark mentioned seemed impossible to know unless he had been present at the scene. New evidence began to reveal a shocking truth. Mark was the one behind Henry's death. Mark had planned his revenge for years, and when the opportunity arose, he didn't hesitate to act. He had cleverly manipulated the relationship between Ben and Henry to create the perfect cover, shifting all suspicion onto Ben. The fingerprint found on the cup in Henry's office. That was a remnant from a previous visit, which Mark had carefully placed at the scene. The ambiguous messages Ben received. They had all been sent from an anonymous number controlled by Mark. Mark thought his plan was foolproof, but his excessive caution became his weakness. When the police meticulously examined Mark's recent transactions, they discovered he had purchased items that matched those found at the crime scene. Data showed that Mark had engaged in suspicious activities related to preparing for his actions, which only strengthened the suspicion surrounding him. In the end, when pressed with irrefutable evidence, Mark confessed to the entire plan. He admitted to being the murderer, and all his actions stemmed from years of accumulated hatred and pain. According to him, Henry's death was the inevitable consequence of the wrongs Henry had inflicted on others, especially on him. With Mark's confession, Ben was fully exonerated. The townspeople who had once gossiped and doubted Ben now realized they had been wrong. But the cost of their suspicions was too great. While the truth about Henry's death was exposed, the relationship between Ben and the town was irrevocably fractured. Ben stood in the interrogation room, the cold light accentuating the emptiness in his eyes. Finally, after all the tense days, he was exonerated. All suspicions about him had been cleared, but contrary to what people might expect, joy never came to him. The declaration of innocence couldn't erase what had happened. The price of purity was a pain deeper than any guilt. Ben's life had been completely upended. The town, which he had called home for so many years, no longer felt the same. Even though he was proven innocent, The scrutinizing glances and whispers behind his back never disappeared. The people of the town couldn't accept the strange relationship between him and Henry, even though there was no evidence to suggest anything wrong. Ben couldn't bear the coldness and gossip anymore. Though he had proved his innocence, he felt he no longer belonged there. A whole community had turned its back on him because of prejudice and misunderstandings. In the end, he decided to leave the town, the place that had once been his home, where he had hoped to find peace. He didn't know where he would go, but he understood that life there had no place for him anymore. He needed a fresh start, somewhere far away, where the past wouldn't haunt him, and where the judging eyes would no longer follow his every move. But even if Ben left, the consequences of the case would haunt the town forever. Although the murderer had been caught, the cost the community had to pay was the unpleasant truths about Henry, a powerful man full of secrets. The dark relationships, the scams, and his selfish actions had all come to light. This once peaceful town was no longer the same. It had become an example of deceit and harsh societal standards. The people now had to confront not only the truth about Henry, but also reflect on the prejudices they had hidden for so long. The case was not just about the death of one man, it was a warning about the things society always avoids. Each person in the town now had to face the uncomfortable truth that they had once accepted injustice, had once remained silent in the face of discrimination and bias. But Ben, with all his courage, had dared to face the accusations and stand up to clear his name, despite everything. He had proven that sometimes, no matter how painful the truth is, it is the only thing that can free us from the shadows of the past. This story ended not with a beautiful conclusion, but with a valuable lesson about prejudice, truth, and courage. It reminds us that, no matter how harsh society is or how heavy the burdens of bias, only the truth can set us free. And no matter how bad or uncomfortable the past is, we must bravely face it and move forward, because only by confronting it can we truly be free.